Hello YouTube. Once in a while I'll talk about wild animals as I have before about the Siberian tigers. Well, today I want to talk about the beautiful country of Georgia, one of the most interesting places on this earth in my opinion. I had seen it many years ago, and I encourage anybody who goes to that part of the world when people are finally allowed to travel freely, do not miss visiting Georgia. It's a unique place. But today I want to talk about wolves. And you know, there are legends about werewolves, and they've existed among many peoples, and they cause superstition and horror among villagers usually. But the Soviet scientist from Georgia, Yason Badridze, in full accordance with the principle of making a fairy tale come true, he became a wolf himself for a while. Professor Yason Badridze, one of the best experts on the behavior of wolves, he still misses his fanged friends, with whom in the 1970s he chased deer, slept on the ground, and escaped from bears. It's an incredible story. There are few scientists like that, in my opinion. There are some others in the world, I'm aware of this. But I want to talk about this man. Today, Yason Badridze is a respected scientist, professor at the Ilia State University in Tbilisi, capital of Georgia, and he's one of the most authoritative ethologists in the world, specialist in the study of genetically determined behavior of wild animals. Ethology is the scientific study of animal behavior, usually with a focus on behavior under natural conditions, and viewing behavior as an evolutionary adaptive trait. Decades ago, everything was different. Ethology as a discipline did not exist in the USSR, and Badridze, the son of a stuntman and an actress, had just graduated from the biological department of the Tbilisi State University and worked as a physiologist. However, he was never an ordinary scientist. An ordinary scientist will not go wild to live in a wolf pack, will not sleep for months and hunt in the forest, drive a deer and fight with a bear. And young Badridze decided to do just that. The Institute of Physiology, of which Badridze was an employee in the early 1970s, also studied the behavior of animals, but in office conditions, at best observing animals caught and accustomed to captivity. It occurred to me that I was studying something I did not know. The ethologist shared this in an interview. So he decided to approach this problem radically. Go to the forest and find out how animals behave in their natural habitat. This daring scientist quickly chose whom exactly to study. From a young age, he got along with dogs. Once he became friends even with a very aggressive Saint Bernard that weighed 105 kilos, and who killed other dogs. But in dogs, according to Badridze, one thing did not suit him. Dogs have one weak point. They are very dependent on the human person. And Badridze was interested in the original instincts laid down by nature, not impacted by human influence in any way. So his road lay straight to the wild ancestors of dogs, to the wolves. Even in his youth, he was interested in studying dogs, and he was able to get along with them, even the most vicious. But again, since his scientific interests were primarily instincts laid down by nature, he quickly realized that he was not interested in dogs because they are very dependent on humans. Therefore, he had no other way but to go to the wolves. But studying a wolf in an office environment, and even a wolf in the zoo enclosure, is the same as trying to swim without water actually being there. There's another reason. As a child, spending time with his father in a hut, Jason in a forest, or Yason first heard a wolf howling, and since then this exciting voice of the wolf, call of the wolf, according to the scientist's own words, has always disturbed him and called him, beckoned him. Yason was not afraid of the forest and its wild inhabitants. He had been constantly in the forest with his father since childhood, hunted, read tracks perfectly, and generally felt confident in the wild. In addition, his father raised Yason to be athletic and agile. Another thing was more difficult. The wolf has long been considered as enemy number one for everyone who lives by cattle breeding. In Soviet times, wolves were shot, and for one skin of this animal handed to authorities over in Georgia, for example, you could get 50 rubles from the state. Therefore, the young scientist's desire to study wolves was perceived as best an oddity in Georgia, as everywhere else. Wolves were traditionally treated with a mixture of fear and distrust. And in 1970s, they preferred not to study them, but to exterminate. Again, Yason Badridze recalled more than once in an interview, the salary of a scientific researcher like him was 150 rubles a month. And they gave 50 rubles for a wolf skin. So he had not to only gain the trust of the wolves, but also protect them from the bullets of local rangers and poachers. However, the physically strong ethologist solved these problems very simply. At the beginning of 1974, when he arrived at the forest area Zoreti of the Borjomi Reserve, where he was going to communicate with the wolf pack, he firstly gave money to the poachers, and secondly, under the threat of a bloodbath, he convinced them not to touch the wolves while he was there. Science should be armed with fists, that's what he believes. There were no grants and no government or state aid. The young scientist could count only on his own experience. And once in his youth, again, he was a hunter and he lived in the forest. And he also counted on luck. There were meetings with predators ahead. The biologist built his entry into the family of gray predators from several stages. First, he explored all the wolf trails, then began to accustom the wolves to his smell. He threw pieces of cloth that he had worn on his body for several days, he put them on the trail. Then he began to put raw meat on these scraps. When the wolves began to eat this meat or bury it, the scientist realized that it was time to introduce himself. He ambushed a couple of mature wolves. The leader and his pregnant girlfriend went to look for a den where they can bring the cubs. And he went out to them on the trail. The wolf remained standing in place, and the wolf came closer, looked at the stranger, then issued a characteristic snorting bark, grinned, and went on. The wolf realized that the man was not going to attack or run away from him, recognized him as safe, and this could be considered a victory. Yason followed the couple and began to live among the wolves. And he walked with them through the forest, slept in the same place where the pack sleeps, a place where the whole gray family gathers. Biologists called such a place as rendezvous sites. He even hunted with the wolves. Yason observed a lot of things that can never be seen except in the wild. How puppies come out of the den for the first time, how wolves agree among themselves about the order of hunting, how they take care of the sick and the old. The pack in which Yason lived consisted of a mature male and female, an old wolf who lived out his life, basically, and young wolves of lower rank. Periyarki, I believe that's the Russian term. The scientist gave them all names, for his convenience, of course. He called them one Nestor, Guram, Manana. He saw that the wolf family has a rigid structure and order that provided the animals with the opportunity to survive as efficiently as possible. The old wolf does not hunt, but it is he who gives the sign that it is time for the pack to move, to go out. Wolves communicate with each other by barking, whining, rubbing their noses, looking into their eyes, and as a result somehow understand each other, perhaps, which is very interesting, even on a telepathic level. They bring food to those who cannot hunt. An old wolf, a pregnant female. Once a young wolf even brought food to Yason himself, who, having injured his leg, lay down and did not go hunting. Wolves drive out too aggressive and quarrelsome individuals from the pack. Yason witnessed such a case. Finally, it became clear to Yason that he was accepted as one of his own when, after killing a deer during hunt, the pack allowed him to cut a few pieces of meat from the ribs. They shared the prey with him. There was also such a case. Returning from the hunt, the pack came across a bear that went straight to Yason. Usually wolves do not mess with bears, but in that case the wolves recaptured, they helped their two-legged friend. And finally, Yason learned to howl like a wolf. When the pack arranged their nightly concerts, he howled with them, and soon realized that this howl is a powerful communication language of gray predators, and that each pack has its own signature style of singing. Returning to humans 2 years after the start of his experiment, Yason Badridze defended first his PhD doctorate dissertation is on wolves. Today, he is one of the most authoritative experts on these predators, again, not only in Georgia, but all over the world. He continued to study wolves for many years, having arranged a huge bestiary and raising young cubs there who had lost their parents. I'm going to go to some of Yason Badridze's revelations, and I may repeat some of the things I said before, but it's worth repeating. So, how to make friends with wolves? By the way, Badridze, he did not have a firearm. Weapons make a person arrogant. He takes a risk, complicates the situation, knowing that he has a gun behind his back. That's what he told the Russian reporters. In addition, the wolves knew the smell of weapons perfectly well and would never approach an armed person. So how can an unarmed person insinuate himself into the confidence of a pack of predators where each of the adult animals is able to bite a person to death in a minute? Well, find out their main paths. As the scientist explained, in the forest, each pack of wolves, which is a small family, no more than a dozen animals, has its own hunting zone with an area of about 100 square kilometers. The pack prefers not to go beyond these grounds, so as not to intersect with other wolves. This is fraught with conflicts and fights. In these areas, wolves often walk the same routes. Rendezvous site, a place where the whole family gathers together and has a rest. Hunting routes, places for watering. I carefully followed their footsteps, but for a long time I did not see anyone, the scientist recalls. Of course, this does not mean that the wolves did not see me. All this time he lived in the forest, he slept without a tent, wrapped in a burqa, cooked food on a fire, but he went to light it for to the river so that the smoke would not frighten the wolves. In the mountains, the current of air flows through the stream, so that the smoke did not bother them. Also, let them get used to your smell. Contrary to the legends about bloodthirsty wolves, these animals attack people quite rarely, mainly due to hunger. Moreover, wolves are conservatives by nature and shy away from everything new, so Badridze had the task of getting the animals to get used to him and not perceive him as a threat. To do this, the scientist scattered pieces of cloth with his smell on their paths for a couple of months. For example, torn sheets from his house, so the animals would get used to it. At first, they walked around the patches in a wide arc. Then, gradually getting used to it, they began to ignore it. And after the young wolf marked one of them, the scientists realized that the wolves had come to terms with his presence. The last step was feeding. Now Badridze threw pieces of raw beef meat on the scraps of cloth, and when he saw that the wolves had started eating them, he decided that it was time to get acquainted. Survive a direct collision. That's one of the points. In conversations about that period of his life, the professor emphasizes you can be as professional as you want and prepare for a meeting with wolves for a long time. But when they're right in front of you, your heart sinks into your heels. One morning I saw on the trail that they had passed a mature male and a female. They were looking for a den for the cubs, and I stayed to wait for them about 50 meters from the trail. Around noontime they returned, and when they noticed the female stopped and the mature male went straight at me. He came up to 5 meters and looked. This state, I'll tell you, it was incredible. When at this distance the beast looks into your eyes, he stood, looked, then barked, turned around, and went onto the path. And they quietly left. And I can't turn my tongue around, as if my tongue has frozen. Well, the deed was done. But it already became clear that this would work. He tried me out how I would react. He saw that I would not attack, and I was not going to run away either. This caveat to my audience, please. You have probably already realized that not everyone can repeat this, and you should not try, even if there is a forest with wolves near the place where you live. So let's go back to Badridze, life in the pack. After the collision, the pack gradually accepted Badridze as their own. At some point, the wolves brought Yason Badridze to the rendezvous site. The pack was small, an old gray-haired wolf, a married couple of 2 mature adult wolves, and 3 grown-up teenage cubs. With caution, but they recognized the scientist. After all, it was not for nothing that he fed them meat and helped against rangers and poachers, and that turned out to be useful. These wolves studied me much earlier than I studied them. When I was just teaching them, they already knew me by my face, and they realized that my presence provides them with a quiet life, said Badridze. Months dragged on. The scientist slept in the same place as the wolves and even hunted with them. The main object of hunting for the wolves of the Borjomi reserve were deer. Of course, the man did not rush at the deer. This is the work of mature male, but only cut off the hoofed animal's path to retreat along with the young wolves. Young Badridze ran well, of course, but he lagged behind the fast-moving animals, but not by much. As a reward, the wolves, having eaten enough, left him meat on deer bones. The ethologist, of course, unlike his wolf's friends, did not bite through the bones, but carefully cut off pieces of meat and took them away to cook on the fire, still located beyond the river. But more often, he had to eat stewed meat, lard and bread, which were delivered once every couple of weeks by a familiar huntsman. Badridze admits that he hates stew, especially with passion after those times. Loneliness also ate at him. Sometimes the scientist missed people so much that he would go far away into the forest and talk to himself aloud, so at least he could hear human speech. Of course, sometimes he returned to Tbilisi, so as not to go completely wild, but not more often than once every 3 months, and only for a few days. Otherwise, the wolf pack would have forgotten him. There were, however, things worse than stew and loneliness. One day, returning from an unsuccessful hunt with the pack, the scientists accidentally disturbed a bear resting by a boulder, and this would have been the end of the future professor's research. He says the bear jumped up. He reared up on his hind legs. That's half a meter between us. What will happen next is unknown. If he waves his paw at me once, there won't be a damn thing left of me. And either I screamed out of surprise or fear, or the bear made a sound. The wolves reacted to this. They rushed over and attacked the bear. One of them grabbed the brown bear by the heel, and he ran away in shock. Usually wolves do not risk getting involved with bears, who are much stronger than them. So protection is a sign of the highest trust. A human person has become a full member of the pack, albeit of a different biological species. So 2 years passed. What Badridze learned about the life of wolves? Of course, all this time the scientists not only ran after deer, ate stew, and disturbed the peace of bears. He scrupulously studied the habits of wolves, their relationships in the pack, the manner of hunting, raising cubs, howling, and carefully documented everything. He described the results of his research most fully later in the book titled The Wolf: Questions on the Ontogenesis of Behavior, Problems, and the Method of Reintroduction, but in a simplified form. Ontogeny, also ontogenesis, is the origination and development of an organism, both physical and physiological, that is, moral development, usually psychological, I should say, usually from the time of fertilization of the egg to the stage of the adult. Some of the research findings can be stated as follows. 1. The wolf pack is a family, not only in the biological sense. The story with the bear shows how wolves have developed mutual assistance, and not exclusively through parents, children. The periarchy, or young wolves of the age of 1 to 2, take good care of puppies born that year. Take care of the old wolves. They bite out fleas, bring and regurgitate food for them. If someone shows too much aggression, he is expelled from the hunting zone. That is, go look for a new family, since you are such a bully. So, in front of Badridze's eyes, it happened to one of the periarchy, whom he called a varchun, or grumbler. 2. Wolves are not born predators, but become such. If an untrained wolf gets into a flock of sheep, he will simply panic. He has no idea that it is food, Badridze explained. Parents teach gradually. First they bring meat, then meat with skin, so the puppies remember the smell of the animal. Then they are already brought to the newly hunted prey, and they are taught to trail and take a trail. All this is brought up in a pack. A wolf born in a zoo will not be able to feed itself, even in a forest teeming with deer. 3. When hunting, wolves, according to Badridze, use a connection between themselves, the nature of which is not completely clear. It can be roughly called telepathic. There is sound, smell, and visual communication, but there is also some kind of non-verbal connection, telepathic. This is very clearly seen before hunting. They sort of confer, look into each other's eyes, a fixed look like this, and the animal turns around, goes and does what turns out to be adequate to do at that moment. It is unclear how this mechanism works, but Badridze himself encountered it during hunting. As if on a whim, he moved exactly to where it is most convenient to block the way to the prey. The hunter that I knew many years ago in southern Africa, he told me a few things like that too, about the strange telepathic communications that animals exhibit among themselves, and he spent many years among them. It's very interesting. I know a few things about coyotes, since I spent many years where coyotes are and have watched them, but of course not like Badridze. But this is an interesting subject to get into, and of course outside of Georgia, I love Africa, Southern Africa, and I've seen a few things, and I collected tales of native people, different tribes, different people who live there, and it's very interesting, but outside of the subject of this video right now. So number 4, the wolf howl is a complex tool for communication, some aspects of which remain unexplored. For example, the wolf language is not universal and varies depending on the territory where wolves live. So Badridze is perfectly able to howl, but he failed when he came to a colleague in Canada to do so. He says, I was in Canada at the invitation of John Teberge. We came to the national park. I began to howl invitingly in a Georgian style, let out intricate sounds, and the wolves did not care about me at all. I was terribly offended. And Teberge just played the clarinet, and that's it. They went crazy. They started howling. So how did this experiment end? As it often happens in life, the family utopia did not last long and ended tragically. After living with the wolves for 2 years, Yason Badridze returned to the city. They saw him off, as he recalled, with a grim, gloomy howl. That's how they said farewell. A year later, when he returned to the Borjomi Nature Reserve, it turned out that the poachers had killed almost 60 wolves, including those with whom he had lived. In his research, Badridze had to communicate with wolves more than once and gain their trust. But in an interview, he says that no pack has touched his soul as much as the first one. Over the past decades, the scientist has done everything possible to preserve the population of wild wolves in Georgia. He bought cubs from hunters, raised them, diligently reproducing the rituals of teaching hunting and other wisdoms of wildlife, and he released them into the woods. At the same time, they had to be specially taught to fear people so that they would not come to the villages and slaughter the sheep. Badridze put special collars on the wolves, and when they approached people, transmitted a small but unpleasant electric shock. So the wolves who grew up in captivity returned to the wild conditions. Since 1998, Yason Badridze no longer raises wolves. It's not the same health that he has. And he cannot, of course, run along with a wild animal. Now, his main activities are basically desk, armchair research, writing books, conducting lectures, but even now this calm elderly man, in whose appearance something wolfish can involuntarily be seen, he doesn't get tired of repeating, it is stupid to see something evil and bloodthirsty in a wolf, as in general in nature, in any of its manifestations. Like all other living creatures, these animals live according to their nature and never take more from nature than they need. There's only one and most terrible animal that breaks out of this harmonious picture, and because of its greed and unpredictability, threatens everyone else, and that animal is a human being. But this behavior is being studied by completely different scientists. So I will bring you more stories about the animals of Eurasia and Africa, and we'll see what other interesting episodes scientists and others have studied. And I really want to get into this very interesting telepathic connections that animals have. I thank you for your support and attention. If you can support my research, and I thank everybody who does, please look at the links in the description to this video. Please subscribe to my channel and tell others. Thank you.